Just about the front door like a ghost into a fog when no one notices the contrast of white on white. And in between the moon and you, the angels get a better view, the crumbling difference between wrong and right. And I walk in the air between the lines through myself and back again where I don't know. And Maria said she's dying. Through the door I hear her crying. Why? I don't know. Round here we always stand up straight. Round here something with a suitcase in her hand. She said she'd like to meet a boy who looks like Elvis. And she walks along the edge of where the ocean meets the land, just like she's walking on the wire in the circus. She parks a car outside of my house and takes her clothes. Said she's close to understanding Jesus, and she knows she's more than just a little misunderstood. She has trouble acting normal when she's nervous. Round here, carving out our names. Round here, we all look the same. Round here, we talk just like lions, but we sacrifice like lambs. Round she's slipping through my hands. Whoa, sweeping Jeremiah like the wind out of the lights. Mom's little baby better get herself in. She says it's only in my head. And she says, I know it's only in my head. And the girl in the car in the parking lot says, man, I should try to take a shot. Can't you see my walls are crumbling? And she looks up at the building, said she thinking of jumping. She said she's tired of life. She must be tired of something around here. She's always on my mind. Round here, amen, we've got lots of time. Round here, we never sense a bad omen, and nobody makes us wait. Round here, we stay up very, very catch me from falling? Would you catch me from falling? Would you catch me 'cause I'm falling down? I said I'm on the rock, around here. The man said I'm under the gun, around here. But I can't see nothing, nothing around here. Dankeschön.
Welcome back to Bold Like a Leopard. We're doing the Razor Sharp live podcast right now, and I hope that you are ready to talk a little bit about our fragile state of civil liberties in America. Are because I think that we're approaching a time when we're going to start wondering exactly if what's been lost can ever be regained. There are some things that happen when a person gets abused that irreversibly imprint themselves on their soul, so and on their personhood, and that I think goes for all sorts of different abuses. So when we talk about mass abuse of the population, when we talk about the coming battle that's going to be between the Biden administration. I'm talking about the legal battle first, but there could be worse battles. Physical battles where people are dragged into some situation where they're forced to take the vaccine because, like I said in the previous podcast, which was actually recorded on my camcorder, if you didn't know. Yeah, there are situations that are, I believe, coming up ahead that only a year or so ago we would have considered impossible. And yet, people still think that we can go back to the normal life that we had before the pandemic without some sort of price being paid in your personal freedom. Look, you've already paid the price. They know, the people who are in charge, that they can always take more because we've done so little to discourage them from taking what they've taken up until now. There's the people who are enforcers of these mandates and these other different provisions that have been in place, whether it's by people like Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, limiting the freedom of people. Those are things that they haven't paid for. In most cases, they never will pay for. Granted that there are exceptions, like with Governor Cuomo, who lost his job, but uh, we don't have any reason to believe yet that he's going to face any consequences for what he's done concerning the nursing homes, right? And that's what's really important. If this entire thing is about public health and about saving lives, how come people who have endangered lives and caused lives to be lost or ruined forever, how come they haven't faced any sort of consequence? And that's something that I think is going to be a major controversy for many years to come, at least among people who can still talk freely. There's obviously those who are of the herd mentality and they can't be reached, and they're always going to believe that what the authorities say is the right thing to do, and they're not going to endanger their own health and safety. So, if you were able to listen to my last podcast entry. I think it went up on Saturday night. I think it did best on BitChute, which is not surprising. BitChute is without a doubt the place where I get the most exposure, thankfully. But I encourage you to, at least if you want to listen to these right now, mostly audio only podcasts, because I'm using my wife's laptop. It's not the best setup. You know what? You can see my face if you want. Hold on. Let me put the video camera on. So, oh wait, it's actually looking right past me. I don't know what the hell is going on. But um that is a little strange. Wow. So anyway, regardless of whether the video camera is showing me or not. Um, so what I'm trying to tell you right now is that uh, you can always find me easier on Alt Tech. If you joined this stream live, then I'm sorry for the extended musical intro, but that song does, I believe, constitute one of the best live performances ever. It's Jupiter Jones' performance of Round Here by Counting Crows. But we're not going to talk about a lot of that banter today because there's just too much going on. And I think that we all know that the nation and the world are at a tipping point, unfortunately, where there is one tendency that is saying, well, we need to centralize more control. We need everybody to be on the same page and to do things together for the public good and to save the lives of everyone. And then there are people who say, well, the public good is not really easy to determine when you have so many people with different needs and different individual requirements and different health situations, which is what we're really talking about, such that if you mandate that people must take a, any sort of medication or any sort of pharmaceutical, or that if you are mandating that people do that, you're basically telling them that we have a one size fits all situation for public health. That is not scientific. It's well known that human beings are very idiosyncratic in terms of their personal health and their needs. Right? That no two people will usually have the same allergic reactions. Right? Even within the same family, it's something that's generally accepted. So why is it that we're standing by and watching as this government is imposing its will through these mandates, whether it's a vaccine mandate or mask mandates or anything of the type? Unfortunately, we know that there are many people who did lose their lives to COVID, and I feel for those people, but we can't bring those people back, and we also can't destroy a virus. We have to have people continue to have the will to go on, live their lives, live past this virus, survive it. It's many people, not only many, but the vast overwhelming majority of people who have contracted the COVID-19 virus have survived it, whether it was before or after the introduction of the vaccines. So I would say that rather than focus on the positive elements of this tragic saga of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is that the human race, despite all of this fear mongering, tends to go on and continue living. The media prefers to stick to the doom and gloom and to stoke fear and distrust among people, because that's really what gets people to tune in and watch their TV sets and read the articles, especially if it's publications like the New York Times or the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, ABC News, NBC, all of them. Now, all of them seem to have very limited people who actually want to do a good job. There are people such as she's not really, I think, a COVID journalist, but for example, at CBS, there's Catherine Herridge. I would say she's an excellent journalist. So I'm not trying to make a blanket statement regarding every single journalist at every single publication, but what I would say is if you're a person who has personal integrity and knows that this is being used in order to cause people to hide and cower in fear, then yes, you should buck the trend at your newspaper, or else find out, leak whatever information you can about their dishonest practices if they are forcing you to withhold information from the public that could actually alleviate this crisis, which I believe that they are doing. And I think I haven't been able to do as much work as I'd like to on this because I've had technical difficulties, I've had scheduling difficulties, but there are many journalists who have risked their careers in order to show that this pandemic, while people should take the health risk seriously, depending on your situation, depending on your situation, you should take it seriously in varying ways. But there are journalists who have lost their careers, but at news stations, local news stations, for example. I think there was one in Houston when they decided to break with their company and leak information that they've been they've been trying to get out, and the news organization says, "Well, no, we don't actually want this information to get out because it doesn't fit our narrative." So, what are we going to deal with specifically in this episode? Why is it called 9/11, the Patriot Act, and how we got here? It's because if you look at the ACLU, which is generally considered to be the premier civil liberties organization of the United States, you have this publication, which was made years ago, which says surveillance under the Patriot Act, hastily passed 45 days after 9/11 in the name of national security. The Patriot Act was the first of many changes to surveillance laws that made it easier for the government to spy on ordinary Americans by expanding the authority to monitor phone and email communications, collect bank and credit reporting records, and track the activity of innocent Americans on the internet. While most Americans think it was created to catch terrorists, the Patriot Act actually turns regular citizens into suspects. And this was the pamphlet that they put out in order to justify the ACLU's campaign against the Patriot Act. And you see basically the long arm of overreach by the government into people's personal lives. And while I don't know whether the ACLU exaggerated elements of their case, I think that if you look at it retrospectively, there's no way that the Patriot Act could still be considered a worthwhile um, a worthwhile piece of legislation. Arjun is asking, "Hey, Bold, how come you are streaming on the Sabbath? It's Sunday night. What the hell are you talking about? It's Sunday night. India, it's probably Monday, isn't it? It hasn't been the Sabbath for more than 24 hours. So how come you don't know what day it is, Arjun? Have you been consuming various chemicals, my friend?" Um, but good question, and I won't hold it against you. You can ask any other questions. But yeah, we're going to talk a lot about the issue of the Patriot Act and how the people who fought against the Patriot Act so strongly for a long while, they've just given up on this notion that America is a land where civil liberties are a paramount consideration. They just don't care anymore. It's sickening because for what it's worth, I know that um, I know that many people out there they think that the Bush administration, they were evil incarnate, but that Obama fixed everything once he came into power. But the reality is, okay, that under Bush, there were many people who started to wake up and realize that, yeah, the federal government can be used in order to abuse the civilian population in the name of fighting terror, in this case, Islamic terror. And that doesn't mean that there was no Islamic terror. That's far from what I'm saying. It's the same issue that I'm saying today. It doesn't matter that there is the real issue of COVID 19. The measures that are being used in order to encroach on the personal freedoms of people in the name of fighting COVID 19, those are worse than the virus itself. MC says civil liberties are not what many think. This is one of the major problems. Well, I'd actually be interested to know what MC's opinion is on this, since we've disagreed on plenty of things before. But in any case, so Ron Wyden on May 26, 2011, he says, I want to deliver a warning. When the American people find out how their government has secretly interpreted the Patriot Act, they will be stunned and they will be angry. So Ron Wyden is a left-wing senator from Oregon. And for many years, okay, I would say that there was a great service done to the country by people like Ron Wyden. They showed that in those years that the Bush administration, it was abusing the privileges under the Patriot Act in order to deny innocent people their civil liberties. And it's not to say that some people did abuse their civil liberties. If you want to look at somebody who abused his civil liberties very egregiously, you have to look at Professor Sami Al-Aryan from the University of South Florida, who was a Palestinian American. Actually, if you want to look objectively, a brilliant mind. He was a computer scientist, but he was also the head of the Islamic Jihad group, and he fought for many years against the government's case against him, which was that he was basically running a terror group from the United States. And American civil liberties organizations, they organized very strongly to defend his personal freedom. Even though, if you look at what he was doing, he was actually trying to, and not just trying to, he was funding and successfully executing the murder of or wounding of innocent civilians. In that case, Jewish civilians over in Israel, and that's something that people don't want to talk about. That the ACLU in those days, they were so in favor of civil liberties that they would defend people that were abusing civil liberties. Um, Arjun says there are rights like right to an internet connection and fundamental rights like right to life and liberty. Is right to privacy a fundamental right in the United States? So, good question. I am going to try to answer questions as soon as I see it, as soon as I see them. So, in the U.S., so this isn't a very clear cut thing because there are very different interpretations. The right to privacy in some cases is guaranteed under the Fourth Amendment, which protects individuals from illegal searches and seizures. But as this Patriot Act and other legislation, like the Foreign Intelligence and Surveillance Act, allow, uh, with the warrant of the Foreign Intelligence and Surveillance Court, the FISA court, you can actually have the Fourth Amendment waived without your attorney or yourself knowing about it, because the intelligence agencies can go to the FISA court, and this is all constitutional. Unfortunately, it is, but I'm not going to deny that it's something that um, that's completely unconstitutional, because the fact is that it's been done. I don't see why it is still this way, but let's say the National Security Agency here in the U.S. says that, you are June, you are some sort of, I don't know, some sort of illegal baseball card dealer or something, and they have evidence against you and they want to spy on you. Okay, there's a totally hypothetical situation, and they have obtained by looking at the records of somebody else that they've surveilled, they've obtained evidence that yes, you deal illegally in counterfeit baseball cards or something like that. So they want to be able to surveil you. So they will go to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and say, hey, we need a warrant to monitor the communications of Arjun. And they'll get it granted because your lawyer is not there. They only hear the side of the intelligence agencies, and supposedly they're going to arbitrate. Supposedly they're going to make the decision by themselves whether or not to allow the NSA to spy on you. But in general, they don't put up a very big fight. There's no adversarial process there. There's nobody to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do it. Okay? There's usually very little resistance from the court. That's something that was very famously at issue under the Trump administration, not because of Trump himself, but because of a person that was an associate of Trump's, Carter Page, who was surveilled under the FISA Act because the CIA, under its director John Brennan under Obama, and the FBI decided that it wasn't enough that he was a cooperative witness against Russian infiltration in the past. They would still authorize the surveillance of Carter Page because he was an associate of Donald Trump. So the FISA court allowed the intelligence agencies at the time to facilitate their surveillance of a Trump associate without any real case against him. There was no evidence that he was actually cooperating with the Russian government. There was no evidence that he had any ill intent with any of the travel that he was doing. Yes, there were things that he was doing that could be construed as, a little strange, but there never was a case against him that he was an asset of the Russian government. But thanks to what they did, the media was able to make it seem like he was. And to this day, the case of Carter Page and the case of other American civilians who were surveilled through the FISA Act and the courts, such as George Papadopoulos, and there's a few others that were in the case. Michael Flynn also, by the way. Michael Flynn, the head of the National Security Council, or no, he was the National Security Advisor under Donald Trump. His case was also due to the FISA court and the FBI claiming, without evidence that he had lied to them, they almost put him in prison for it. And he's actually very lucky to be free today because he was very close to going to prison. MC says the NSA does not work that way and not their targets. You're talking about the FBI and CIA, which get the order to use NSA assets. Okay, so I have the process backwards according to MC. But in the end, the NSA would do the surveillance. What MC is saying is that the FBI or CIA would go to the FISA court and ask to have access to the data that is being collected about the individual. If I'm not, so tell me if I'm correct in reading your comment. Arjun says, how did the one-sided FISA process pass the constitutionality test? Such an illegal procedure should have been struck down by the Supreme Court, right? I don't know if it ever got to the Supreme Court. One of the problems with this is that the Congress gave the FISA court this format to work with, and in a very technical manner, it is constitutional because you're not putting the person on trial yet. All you're doing is you're collecting the information, and you're supposed to keep it confidential and classified until it is public record through a trial or something, right? So if somebody is actually indicted and brought to trial and the information is not exculpatory or is not, I should say, not exculpatory, but it's something that's grand jury material, certain information that could compromise them in a personal manner that's not connected to the crime. So, for example, let's say that that part of the case proceedings includes the address of somebody that the subject is having an affair with. So that has to be, from what I understand, completely concealed and redacted in the documents, and the identity of the person has to be redacted and withheld legally, or else that person can sue the federal government for basically ruining their reputation through an unlawful surveillance operation. MC says not just access to the data, but to actually direct the NSA to target specific individuals. Well, that's actually what I meant, MC. Maybe I wasn't being clear about it. MC says not all aspects are legal, which is why they changed the record keeping away for the government and made it mandatory of various businesses. Okay, so I hope I cleared up some of that. It is very complicated. I don't understand it totally myself. I'm not an attorney, and I don't think that it would be an easy field within law to understand, because I think in many cases the judges are behind on it, because a lot of it involves new technology, both the surveillance technology and both the the high tech that the subjects would use. So it's very interesting. Like, what would constitute an admissible piece of evidence? Would a Snapchat message be admissible? I mean, think about it. Snapchat is supposed to delete your message, right? But people can still take a snapshot of it, right, from their phone. So this was their attitude towards the Patriot Act back in the day, and I would say that the the passing of the Patriot Act was one of the worst mistakes of American society in its history. It wasn't a mistake of the government, because there were already rumblings back then. It was prepared under Clinton, just such an act. I think the CIA director George Tenet, who was under Clinton, had helped to prepare the Patriot Act, and there were other Republican politicians who helped to prepare it. It's a black mark on the history of the Republican Party, but by the way, the Democrats mostly went along with it as well, with notable exceptions. So the Patriot Act was, I believe, unfortunately, one of the worst results of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So on that note, I do want to say that on the anniversary of 9/11, which was on Saturday night, or actually, all day Saturday, um, I think it is appropriate that we remember the the tragedy of all those people who did lose their lives on that day, whether it was the airline passengers, whether it was the people in the World Trade Center. There are people, for example, like her name is Barbara Olson. So what people don't know is that Barbara Olson, who was one of the great investigative journalists who went after the Clinton family back in the 90s, was on one of the planes on 9/11. I think she was in the plane that went in that crashed into the Pentagon. Um, if it's if I'm not mistaken, that was American Flight 175. So Barbara Olson's death, it's a tragedy, unfortunately, because this was a woman who dedicated her work to exposing public corruption. But I'm certain that there were people of all different political persuasions on those planes who were killed. I'm certain that there were people within the buildings of um, all different political and social persuasions who were killed, all different races and religions and everything. So, as an American, you know, I don't think that you have to necessarily look at it as this moment when America was suddenly at war. I think the war was being waged way before that. I think people would have to agree, if you're looking at it clear headedly, that groups like Al Qaeda were attacking the United States for several years before that. It's just the United States wasn't really um, responding. There were, for example, attacks in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia by both Al Qaeda and other jihadist groups. There was the first World Trade Center attack in 1993. However, the reason that 9/11 carries so much weight is because it actually changed the mindset of Americans, because for the first time Americans were under the it dispelled the notion that we could not be attacked in our own homeland. You know, the culture of America pre 9/11 was much different. It was very carefree. There is this phrase called the end of history that is used regarding the mindset of America after the end of the Cold War, where people believe that, yeah, there are no more frontiers to cross. Basically, the system that we have has prevailed, and America is at peace. It's Pax Americana. And if you watch movies from the 90s, they reflect a sort of absence of a real purpose, because Americans had largely they'd lost any real adversary. There was no threat to America at the time, and that was lost on 9/11. And suddenly, yes, you did see people start to look and fear people overseas, as if every single one of these countries has they're after us. They're after America, and they're trying to destroy us, which I think is an exaggeration. But it did dispel the notion that none of those countries are out to get us. It did dispel the notion that America will be triumphant forever, and it did dispel the notion that America, after the Cold War, will be the eternal power all over the world. So MC is saying, just catching up here, the Patriot Act exposed the total corruption of the judiciary branch more than anything else. We are not at war with just this group or that group, of the entire 12th century mindset. So, on that note, this is a little sidebar. I didn't want to focus too much on that. The issue of radical Islam that came to light after 9/11, I think it was important to talk about. It still is important to talk about. If you look at some of these groups, it's not something you can ignore. And there are people who are civil libertarians who will say that these people are savages, that they don't have any real threat to America, that they could not actually, um, that they couldn't possibly contrive to plot against America as was alleged, right? They look at these societies in the Middle East and Central Asia and North Africa as being so backward that it was just the CIA and FBI and the deep state that was inventing this threat. And the truth is that while I think that the CIA and the FBI, they manipulated the situation for their own purposes rather than address it. No, there is a threat from this type of mindset. It's not easy to find a solution. That's really the problem, because you can't cure, a problem with another society. It's something that they have to address, and it's like psychologists say that the patient can only get better if he wants to get better, and in most of these cases, they don't want to get better, and they have to deal with the consequences. So if you know people who are from the Middle East, I happen to know many people from Egypt, for example. Um, you know, there are a lot of people who move here from Egypt because while they grew up and lived in a very aspirational society and wanted to go forward in life and have a prosperous mindset, yeah, Egypt is full of a lot of this type of fanaticism, right? There's a lot of groups that say that modernization of Egypt and the bringing of Egypt into the 21st century as a modern society is wrong, and it's immoral, and that it will corrupt the society there. And look, there are there are corrupting elements of modernity. You don't have to look very far here in America to know this, but is the answer to go to this mindset of what MC is saying, the 12th century, or rather, if in some cases the 7th century? I don't think so. And to be honest, Egypt went through that cycle in I believe the early 2010s. If you know about the Arab Spring issue, where the government of Mubarak was overthrown in Egypt and replaced by the Morsi regime. They went through some sort of Islamist renaissance that failed, right? And the military soon took over again, and Egypt is back to where it was for many years. This secular military dictatorship that says, hey, we don't have freedom, but we have basically normalcy. That's what Egypt is enjoying right now, quote unquote enjoying. But in some cases, you could make the argument that Egypt doesn't have the capability to actually be a society that's completely open, right? They had the chance to go that way and they did not. So America can't force Egypt to do that. It's a process that can only develop organically. And if the conditions aren't there, then they aren't there, and America has to accept it. It doesn't mean we should be happy that a nation like Egypt is like that. It doesn't mean that we should be happy that this colossal failure of an experiment in Afghanistan turned out the way it was, but that's just the way it is. And unfortunately, 9/11 was the beginning of military adventurism in the Middle East and Central Asia and North Africa. And America, I think, has lost a lot because of it. I don't think it's debatable anymore. America lost a lot because of it. Lost in terms of people who, they idealistically left to fight in those countries and to defend the American way of life. In some cases, to spread the American way of life, which was really the problem over there, because you can't force a country like Egypt to become like America. It's a much more ancient society with many different complexities that are foreign to our condition here. And this adventure was ultimately a failure. It was a failure in Egypt. It was a failure in Afghanistan for different reasons, but not entirely unrelated ones. Arjun says, let's all remember that Sayyid Qutb of Egypt, who wrote the jihadi book Milestones, where he called for a return to a violent jihad. That group became the inspiration of the Salafi jihadi group, ISIS. So that's an interesting comment. The book he's referring to was by Sayyid Qutb, who was an Egyptian student in the United States in, I think, the early 20th century. I don't remember, might have been in the 30s. And what, if I remember correctly, so I didn't read the book, but the description of the book is that, or the synopsis is that Qutb visits the United States. He sees the entertainment and debauchery of the vaudeville culture here and the women who are there and behaving immodestly. And he says that if this is the type of society that the West is trying to spread here in Egypt, then that's the real enemy. And that he was saying that Muslim societies have to return to a purer form of Islam in order to fortify their societies against the corruption of westernization. And there's various different concepts that he dreamt up in his book. And if you think about it, it was a very powerful message that he gave to Muslims in the Middle East and Central Asia, South Asia, by the way. Also, Arjun lives in South Asia somewhere. Not going to say where, but if you think about it, that type of mentality, that type of attitude towards the West, it is specifically targeting westernization of these societies. So America said, well, we're going to go westernize some of these countries. Well, why would you do that? These people have already made a decision on their prerogative that they're not going to be westernized. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't address the threat that they pose to America, because they still despise the United States. They despise other countries. They despise, in some cases, they despise Russia because of the way that certain Muslim minority groups are treated in Russia. They despise the secular Muslim governments of various countries like Syria. They despise Israel. Of course, they also despise, in some cases, the monarchies in Arab states, in Arab and Muslim states. They despise the India. They despise, basically anyone who disagrees with their mentality. So you still have to be conscious of the threat that they pose, but you can't become so proactive in pursuing their defeat that you're gonna overstretch your resources and try to accomplish things that simply are beyond the actual scope of your mission, right? Starhopper, thank you for joining. I think I know Starhopper from a certain chat group that I'm in, but he says Arjun Sinha says nutty is a kind way to put it. So, um, I think he's talking about Saeed Qutb. So, yes, those of you that are joining, so the subject today is the mindset that was changed on 9/11, and the unfortunate way that that change in mentality affected American society, such that we really didn't learn anything. In fact, we've only hurt ourselves. And yes, we've hurt other people overseas, but I think in the long run, we've hurt America more through it. And I think that if we're talking about the context of the vaccine mandate and civil liberties, and the way that the Patriot Act violated civil liberties, and on the one hand, and the way that now we're seeing that the vaccine mandates are violating civil liberties, we see that it's I think everybody has the potential to embrace a specific type of tyranny, right? The ACLU very seriously opposed the Patriot Act, rightfully so, okay, because there were elements of the Patriot Act that I don't think you can justify. Here, in this brief primer, it says the Patriot Act does not require information obtained by NSLs to be destroyed, even if the information is determined to concern innocent Americans. At least 34,000 law enforcement and intelligence agencies have access to phone records collected through NSLs. Uh, those are national security letters. So your information has been collected and aggregated forever on these databases, and you don't really have much of a say in how it's being deployed. In response to 9 NSLs, 11,100 Americans' telephone account records were turned over to the FBI. The Patriot Act prohibits Americans who receive NSLs from telling anyone. These gag order provisions have been held unconstitutional in several legal cases. So there's an answer to somebody who was asking earlier. There are elements. This wasn't of the FISA court. I think they were asking about the FISA court. But there are elements of the Patriot Act that have been found to be unconstitutional, because they're basically telling people, oh, first of all, we're going to spy on you. Second of all, if you know we're spying on you, you can't tell other people about it, because you could tip them off about the fact that we're collecting information about them that could incriminate them. And while I don't think that we should hope to, um, you know, let criminals get away with harming other people, uh, this includes innocent people, right? Arjun says, unfortunately, because of U.S. military interventions across the world, a recent poll showed that the U.S. is viewed as a bigger threat to democracy than China or Russia. Ironic. Well, I'll tell you one thing, okay? People talk about Russia so much in the past few years. And yet they don't understand that the threat from Russia is largely something that is contained to a specific part of the world. Now, I think that countries that ally with Russia, they pay a price. And in some cases, those are prices that come at the expense of their citizens' welfare. But the fact is that we're not going to eliminate those countries as world powers. It would do better for America and the world to work with at least one of them. In my opinion, it's better to work with Russia because they need more from us than China does. But um, look, yeah, I would say that the poll is accurate. Russia and China undermine democracy, but I think that America does it, and in some cases, it's much more catastrophic. So it's a very tough truth to face up to, especially in the context of 9/11. So this is hold on. This is an article that the ACLU published just a few months ago. It says there's a lot that can go wrong with vaccine passports. Any proposal for vaccine credentials must be primarily paper-based, decentralized, and protect privacy. With COVID-19 vaccination rates accelerating, governments around the world have begun to consider implementing a standardized credential or vaccine passport that would let people prove that they've been vaccinated. And the idea became more real when the Washington Post reported on Sunday that the Biden administration was working with companies to develop such a structure. Our nation's primary push right now should be equitable vaccine distribution that gets as many people as possible vaccinated and reaching herd immunity, yada, yada, yada. Um, Then he gets into this thing where he says, but digital credentials present a number of new potential problems, and we would propose a vaccination credential system that does not meet three crucial criteria. One, it is not exclusively digital. A system that is exclusively digital, whether by design or as a practical matter, would be a non starter because it would increase inequality. Many people don't have smartphones, including disproportionate numbers from some of our most vulnerable communities, such as people who are low income, have disabilities, or are homeless, as well as more than 40% of people over age 65. As a result, any vaccine credential system would need to include a paper based version for those who don't have a smartphone or simply don't want to use one. That's hilarious. That's something that they use as an excuse for why there shouldn't be voter ID. Um, because they say, some of these people they're old and they can't find the BMV, or they're and the funniest thing is when they say that black people can't find the BMV. But that's really something that is I think that that's a dumb excuse. No, the reason that you don't need a vaccine passport has nothing to do with whether the data should be digitally captured or on a paper copy. Um, there were infringements on civil liberties way before there were smartphones and everything. It just makes it easier that there are smartphones and electronic devices that can be used for this, right? Starhopper says 9/11 was used as an excuse to erode our rights and privacy, much like Corona is now. Doesn't mean there isn't a real threat, but that those threats are used for nefarious purposes, which pose an even larger threat than their original concern. Right. So that's a good synopsis of our main topic today, and I think the topic of many discussions around this. So, if you have seen people discuss this before, um, feel free to chime in and mention something that I haven't covered yet. So, two, it is decentralized and open source. So it says the quest for a digital identity and credentialing system has become an entire field unto itself. Numerous companies, technologists, and academics have already generated a variety of concepts, standards, and products that would let us use cryptographic files or quote tokens on our phones to prove things about ourselves across our lives. The best of these schemes and the only one that would be considered for any digital elements of a vaccine credentialing system takes a decentralized and open source approach that puts individuals in control of their credentials and identity data, which they would hold in a digital wallet. Okay, and remember, these are the criteria for the ACLU, and this is part 3. It does not allow for tracking or the creation of new databases. Well, then you don't have it. So it says here, unless a vaccine credential system is completely decentralized and user-centric, it creates a potential for amassing new personal data. If some big company is getting notified any of your credentials, that would let them track your movements and interests, the stores, concerts, and transportation venues you visit, and much more. In the absence of airtight legal protections for privacy, any such information could then be sold for commercial purposes or shared with law enforcement. That would affect all of our freedoms. Notice here, but it says, but will have a particularly chilling effect on communities of color, including immigrant communities that are already over policed. So, long story short, it's bad because your personal data could be leaked to people like corporations and foreign governments, but it's super, super bad for people who are not white. That's their main point, as if it really matters, as if there aren't white people that are targeted by the police unjustly. It's really ridiculous how they have to use race in order to sort of spice up their points about civil liberties. In reality, so this is what I would say. All of these are valid concerns, but they're concerns of Americans in general. It has nothing to do with whether you're a person of color. And I would like to say again, Carter Page wasn't a person of color. He was pursued by the federal government unjustly and without any cause. When will the ACLU ever say anything about him? I don't remember them saying anything. Maybe I'm wrong. The ACLU should also know that Michael Flynn, not a person of color, pursued unjustly by the legal system, by the law enforcement, simply because of who he's associated with. Arjun says India is one of the largest terror targets with tens of thousands dead over the last 4 decades. The government uses the UAPA, which is a harsh law, but citizens aren't under surveillance. So, right, there are countries that have had states of emergencies for many, many years, and our concept of civil liberties would be foreign to them because they don't even remember a time when there was no civil strife and conflict. So it's not only India. There's places like Colombia, by the way, had a civil war for about 50 years. So there's people who lived and died during that civil war, and they never knew any other reality. So we have to acknowledge that America has been very lucky to live in a very peaceful time when these civil liberties were considered, or were to be taken for granted, unfortunately. And in the future, I think we have to fear becoming a country like some of the other examples that I'm talking about, that they don't have those freedoms and they can't get them back because they're stuck in this cycle, right? So the ACLU has sort of flip-flopped on this, and it says vaccine mandates and civil liberties. Many employers and schools are putting in place rules that require employees and students to receive COVID-19 vaccines. These requirements are often referred to as, quote, vaccine mandates. Each mandate's permissibility must be analyzed independently. However, based on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on public health, and based on long-standing and recent court decisions, our current view is that many of the recent vaccine mandates being imposed by the government, schools, and private employers to address COVID-19 would likely be held constitutional. Please see below for answers to some commonly asked questions. Are vaccine mandates new? So it says, while COVID-19 vaccine mandates are new, there is a long history of vaccine requirements in our country, including in schools, healthcare facilities, and the U.S. military. As far as back as 1905, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Jacobson versus Massachusetts, upheld the authority of states to enforce mandatory vaccination laws on public health and safety grounds. So what I find interesting about this is that that was a case from that was basically the eugenics era, when vaccines were considered to be a way, in some cases, to cull the weak from the population. So the person who wrote the decision was John Harlan, who, by the way, was a very brilliant justice. But um, it says here, Justice John Marshall Harlan delivered the decision for a 7-2 majority that the Massachusetts law did not violate the 14th Amendment. The court held that in every well-ordered society charged with the duty of conserving the safety of its members, the rights of the individual in respect of his liberty, may at times, under the pressure of great dangers, be subjected to such restraint to be enforced by reasonable regulations as the safety of the public may demand. So there are court precedents to this. So those people who are thinking, oh, it's going to get struck down, it's going to get struck down. We don't know yet, but I think you can only hope that it will be. Anyway, so let's see here. Okay, good. So 1 second. Let's see if there's any new comments. Cull the weak from the population. So Starhopper is talking about that, and there are many people who are talking about this issue where is it to get rid of seniors? Is it to get rid of the infirm and the mentally handicapped or something like that? I don't know for sure whether eugenics is the goal, but there certainly is this theme that is being passed along on the left where they see certain people as being, while benign, to be a burden on society. That this is an issue with abortion. This is an issue with their attitude towards some senior citizens who they think have a very backward attitude. So these are things that are not going to be going away, and I wanted to discuss them tonight in the context of remembering 9/11 and the Patriot Act and how it got us here. And we see the same issue where the ACLU, they stood firm on the Patriot Act. They fought Bush all the way and tooth and nail. And I think that they got some of these provisions of the Patriot Act to be deemed to be unconstitutional without actually invalidating the whole act. And now we're seeing with the vaccine mandates, they've sold their soul and gone completely the other way. So with that being said, I have to go. I'm getting tired. And I hope to talk to you guys again sometime. Hopefully when there are better developments. So please stay safe and don't back down. Civil disobedience is the best way. Don't let your authorities turn you into a serf and force you to mortgage your own health for your personal freedom. That's about it for today. I will be uploading this as soon as I can to Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. And you can also find me on Gab and Minds. And you can also support me on Subscribestar. Most of that information should be in the description below, as well as joining the newsletter, which is the third link in the description. And I'll talk to you later.
Just about the front door like a ghost into a fog when no one notices the contrast of white on white. Just about the front door like a ghost into a fog when no one notices the contrast of white